You're listening to the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It's time to wake up with the Morning Boys on Worldwide Sports Radio Network. And here's your host, Ryan Hickey.
Yeah, how about that? Welcome in to the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. As the amazing voice guy just said, it is the Morning Boys with your host, Ryan Hickey. How about that? An official open right here as things are really, really coming together on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. We do appreciate you tuning in, giving us a few minutes here on this Monday morning. Hope everyone had a great weekend, stayed safe, stayed sane, got out of the house, entertain yourself somehow. It is obviously it is a tough time to do that, but thankfully, in a world with no live sports, in a world where there's very little entertainment in terms of live entertainment, right? There's no concerts, there's no sporting events. TV shows, obviously, can still be aired, but for the most part, not much new, original live content out there. And if you are a big sports fan, or really even not, even just, a casual sports fan, last night, ESPN finally rolled out their much-anticipated, highly hyped documentary, at least the first two episodes last night, of The Last Dance about Michael Jordan and the 97-98 Bulls run, their last run, the sixth and final NBA championship that franchise won. And obviously, last night was, again, they debuted the first two episodes, and it did not disappoint. Wow. Was that great? We'll obviously dive into a lot of that. As thankfully, for the next 4 Sundays, we have a lot to look forward to because at least the first two episodes last night, obviously a lot of look back of his life early on, going to North Carolina and then going to the Bulls as a rookie and a second-year player. A lot of great information there, a lot of great context in there. Myself, as someone who's 25 years old, really grew up with the LeBron James era of the NBA, really didn't know too much and didn't get a chance to see Michael Jordan live at all, really, for the most part, let alone, get to look at all this in-depth knowledge and film that was really never seen before from their last year, and also, again, from Michael's earlier life. So that was, if you watched it, obviously, we'll discuss a lot about it here, and we'd love to get your comments and your thoughts because there was just so much there. And again, that was only 2 of 10 episodes last night. An incredible job by ESPN and a great debut so far of part 1 and part 2 of the 10-part Last Dance documentary, again, about the 97-98 Bulls. But really, while it focuses and most of the filming was from that sixth and final championship year, obviously, it really encapsulates Michael Jordan's entire career and really gets, to the core of who he was and his competitive spirit. So we'll get into that. And there was, at least watching that, I thought an interesting parallel you can make because obviously, you have Michael Jordan and you have LeBron James. That is the lifelong debate now. Who is the better player? Obviously, if you were probably above 30, you get to see Michael Jordan live. A lot of people will say Michael Jordan. If you're even older than that, people will say Wilt Chamberlain, or there's a Kareem, Wilt. There's plenty of players back in the 60s and 70s that people can say and look to and say, hey, that was the best player of all time. Michael doesn't compare. Again, if you're an 80s or 90s person, it's Michael Jordan. And now, if you're a millennial or starting to grow up and watching the NBA, LeBron James obviously dominated the headlines. But watching last night, at least the first 2 parts, I really thought that there was a great parallel that could be drawn to Michael Jordan and Steph Curry. We'll get to that in just about 20 minutes and how I think they both were able to change the game the way we know it. We have NFL draft needs. It is NFL draft week. So we'll get to that. We still have the NFC North to get to, and we'll dip into a little bit of the NFC South with the Falcons and the Saints. And I want to kind of bring in a new game here later on in the show. NFL draft, realistic or reach? This week especially, maybe even more than ever, because of the technology issues, or I should say challenges that are going to be in the way of general managers and some teams, more than ever, really, I think we will see trades happen pre-draft more than ever, right? You rarely kind of see teams trade up in the draft a few days before the draft actually occurs. And I think we'll see that, or at least have a lot of trades locked in place if a few things happen, because of the unknown with technology and the worry that if we wait to the last second, maybe a trade we want or the pick we want won't be available to us because, barring a technological failure, we can't really take too many chances. So I think there'll be more trades and more build-up leading into the draft because, again, a lot of these GMs and teams want to have a lot of plans locked in place one way or another. And with that comes a lot of rumors about teams wanting to trade up, teams wanting to trade down, players maybe even on the trade block during this draft. So we'll flesh out here a few of these draft rumors. Are they realistic? Could they actually happen? Or is it a reach? Are they really hoping it's going to happen, but really there's not enough there to actually make it happen? So like I said, and we'll have also Brett McMurphy, who's supposed to join with us on Thursday. He will be here today, same time, 10 a.m., so just about 15 minutes from now he will join us. But he was the one from Stadium who put out this survey to 112 athletic directors across college football Division I about, will we have a season? And most likely, and really the genesis of the survey was, if college football is not played from August to December like we're usually used to it being played, what will it look like? How will we be able to fit in these games? How can we be able to fit into a season? Because right now, at least the consensus is that these universities and schools cannot afford to not have a college football season. So much revenue is relied upon from college football that it is important and imperative that a season goes on. So we'll discuss with him what a season could look like. Could we have spring football? Could we have a national title game on Memorial Day weekend of 2021, and also some college football playoff expansion as well? We'll get into that with Brett, again, top of the hour at 10 a.m. Eastern. But like I said, last night, we will start with The Last Dance because the first two episodes were debuted last night, and it was absolutely incredible. So I figured, there's so much to unpack, so much to discuss. And again, just early on in Jordan's career, figured, there's really not one or two takeaways that I thought. At least we're going to do 6 takeaways for all 6 titles that the Bulls won, again, from in the 90s. So the first takeaway I thought, at least watching this Last Dance, if you have your thoughts, Facebook, Worldwide Sports Radio Network, we're on Facebook. Twitter, WWSRN_radio. Either drop us a comment underneath the show on Facebook or drop us a tweet underneath the live stream, again, on Twitter at WWSRN_radio. Love to get your thoughts because, like I said, this was a show I think that every sports fan watched, every even casual fan, even my mom, I was shocked last night, was talking about her excitement to watch the show. And she's not a sports fan at all. She watches the games that we watch and me and my dad watch. But for the most part, she's not really too big of a sports outside of the teams we root for. So it's crazy to think that this show, and more importantly, Michael Jordan, had a reach, that expands just Bulls fans or NBA fans. It's really sports fans overall. And even those casual sports fans have an interest and intrigue with Michael Jordan. So like I said, we'll do 6 takeaways because the Bulls won 6 titles. And this is, at least watching the first part, this really stuck out to me because the first part really kind of hit on that basically the 6th title, and more importantly, the final title, 97-98 season, almost didn't happen. And I thought, at least, I don't think the Bulls win that 6th and final title if social media was around back in 1997, 1998. And here's what I mean. You had all these factors after the Bulls won in 1997, heading into, again, the 97-98 season, that there was so much turmoil, so much question, so much distraction around a team that's won 5 titles in 7 years that we will never probably ever see again for a team that successful in such a short spurt, right? So you obviously had Scottie Pippen. He's upset because he is the 6th highest paid player on his own team, not in the NBA, not ever, on his own team, despite being obviously the 1A to Michael Jordan. Arguably, you heard people in the documentary talking about how they think at a point Scottie Pippen was the 2nd best player in all the NBA. So he's the 6th highest paid player in his team heading to that final championship season. Now, part of it's his own doing, signing a 7-year deal for $18 million back in 1991. But to have all that contention about a contract being so low, being laughably low, and ownership and front office basically having nothing to do with salary restructuring, that he was so upset that just going to that final year, again, with the Bulls favored to win a 6th title, going for history, that he decided, you know what, I'm going to have a spite surgery because my leg hurts. I should have got surgery after the finals in 97. He had maybe the line of the documentary so far, I didn't want to F up my summer. So he spends, those months in June, July, and August relaxing, enjoying the summer, enjoying coming off an NBA championship, and then decides once the season starts, I'm going to have surgery. I could have had it, again, in June. I'm going to have it now when the season starts and miss the first few months. So you had that where you had a player with little salary openly being upset about being paid so little. Obviously, everyone in the NBA world, everyone in the sports world realizes this guy deserves to be the second highest paid player on the team, let alone maybe the NBA. And he goes so far as to get a surgery, and elects to get surgery right when the season starts to purposely have him sit out for the first few months and really hurt the Bulls. So you have that drama right there. You have the Phil Jackson drama coming back. Will he come back for a sixth? To have a chance to win a sixth title? I think about this. You had in '97 after the Bulls win that press conference post game after they win the '97 finals, minutes after they were champions for the fifth time. You have Michael Jordan still in uniform, drenched in sweat, in the post-game press conference talking about how he doesn't want to play for another coach. Phil Jackson absolutely deserves to come back on this team. And if Phil doesn't come back, well, you know what? Guess what? Michael has options. He might not be back. Could you imagine this day and age with social media? A team wins a title. And let's just use the Warriors, for example, because they were the latest dynasty of the NBA, right? The Warriors win the title. They win their third title, right? You have KD, you have Steph, you have Clay. That trio dominates. They beat the LeBron James-led Cavs. And again, LeBron leaves Cleveland, right? So they win their title. Could you imagine Steph Curry after the game? They just beat the Cavaliers. They just win their third NBA Finals in 4 years. The team is coming back next year. Kevin Durant's under contract. Klay Thompson's under contract. Steph Curry's under contract. Most of that team is coming back again to defend their title and go for 4 and 5 years. Could you imagine after the finals, literally minutes after they win their third title, you have Steph Curry saying, I hope Steve Kerr comes back. Steve Kerr absolutely deserves to come back. If Steve doesn't come back, maybe I might exercise my muscles and I might go somewhere else. I have options to play elsewhere. Maybe, I shouldn't be on this team if Steve Kerr can't coach. Where you have a GM so fueled by gratification and basically wanting the approval that he helped put this team together, and Jerry Krause as the general manager of the Bulls. He was dead set on changing everything possible to show that he is still the mastermind of this dynasty, and he deserves more credit than he wanted. He was upset Phil Jackson was getting all the credit. He was upset Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen was getting all the credit. And so in order to try to rein in and take back some of the credit from the players and the coach, put it on him, he told Phil Jackson, basically, you're going to come back one more year. And it took Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, to basically force his way, throw his weight around and say, Phil, you're coming back and you're going to help us get a sixth title. And then you have Jerry Krause right after that saying, yeah, Phil, it's your final year. Could you imagine, again, in a day in social media where we have 24-hour TV networks, we have 24-hour radio stations, we have social media, again, that makes talking with these athletes, accessing these athletes, reaching these athletes so much easier than it was even back in the late 90s. To where you have Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson basically getting pestered all that final season. What is it like to have, be on your final year? Phil, do you care? I mean, Phil, no matter. Jerry Krause literally said you can go 82-0. You're not coming back next year. That distraction alone, I feel like, would weigh down a team so much that I think it would make it hard to win a title. I think about all that drama, all that turmoil for a team that was so successful. I personally don't see how they would be able to overcome it and overcome those distractions. If social media was in place, if the media was the way it is today, where you have 24-hour access, and again, all the TV, sports, radio, social media would be basically obsessed about how a coach who has won 5 titles in 7 years is being forced out. You have the superstar player, transcendent face of the NBA, talking about how if his coach can't come back, he might not come back. Could you imagine LeBron James? After they win the title, Ty Lue is forced out, and he goes, yeah, you know what? If Ty can't come back, I might not be back in Cleveland. People would go, no fans would be able to even enjoy the title, because now all you're worrying about is, will LeBron come back? What can we do to make LeBron come back? Imagine trying to alienate the best player in basketball at that time, the face of your franchise, the person who turned your organization around from a team and an organization that was getting out-attendanced by an indoor football or indoor soccer league, I believe, before Michael got there. An indoor soccer league in Chicago was drawing more fans than the Bulls. Turns around, helps orchestrate one of the greatest dynasties, arguably the greatest dynasty in all of the NBA. And there's so much jealousy there that they want to force out some of the reasons why they were so successful. So if social media, that was one of my biggest takeaways. If social media was around back in the late 90s, I think that sixth and final title they get, I don't think it's happening. I think there's too many distractions personally that could derail what the Bulls did, but it shows how impressive it is and even gives them even more credit that they were able to win that final title despite all the distractions circulating around them. That's my first takeaway. I also thought that the Bulls almost entered rarefied air in the wrong way, right? I think they're in rarefied air. The 90s Bulls are talked about as legacy, as royalty in the NBA circles, as they should. But think about this. Going back to that 97 season, right? They win the finals. They win their fifth in 7 years. Well, Jerry Krause, Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, they were thinking about rebuilding. 5 titles in 7 years. They were close. They almost pulled the trigger on rebuilding the team and not giving them a chance to defend their title and go for 6 and 8. And the reason why they would enter rarefied air is because teams rarely break up after they win. Right? And I went back. You see these teams, whether it's the Spurs, whether it's the Lakers of the early 2000s, the Heat with LeBron James, and even most recently the Warriors. Teams don't break up after they win. Teams break up when they lose. Right? You had the Lakers and their dynasty go on with Shaq and Kobe. They break up. Kobe and Shaq split up, not after they win their last title, but a few years after that, after they lose and don't win another title. The Spurs really never, they're kind of an exception because you have Greg Popovich, Tim Duncan. They're just the model of consistency. But the Heat with LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, right? They go to 4 straight finals. They go 2-2. They didn't break up after they won the second title in 3 years. After they had that incredible comeback against the Spurs. They didn't break up. LeBron didn't leave after that. Eric Spoelstra didn't leave after that. Dwayne Wade didn't leave after that. LeBron really only left, again, after they lose that 4th and final finals appearance they had against the Spurs. But they broke up after they lost. The Warriors, similar, didn't theoretically break up because a lot of pieces are still together. But KD left, and that kind of changes the outlook a little bit. But for the most part, these teams didn't break up. And if they did, 1 or 2 players left. They weren't going to have a mass exodus like the Bulls were about to have after 97 that they had in 1998. You rarely see teams break up and not given a chance to defend their title and break up after a win. And I understand 98 they did, but we kind of knew that was coming again. When you had the writing on the wall with Phil Jackson, MJ retires after 98, there was writing on the wall that this team was not going to be together. This was going to be the last shot, which is why they called it the last dance. You rarely see teams break up after they win titles and have success. And again, going back to social media, I can only imagine what social media must have been like. I can only imagine what it's like to be a Bulls fan. You can't even enjoy half these titles because all you're worrying about is Phil Jackson going to come back? Is Michael going to come back? Is he going to retire? Are they going to alienate Michael Jordan, the best player to ever play this game? Are they going to alienate him because they're basically trying to make it as hard on him as possible? So that was my second takeaway, is just almost, if they decided to rebuild the 97, not go for that 6th and final title chase in 97-98, they would have really entered rarefied air for breaking up a dynasty before it was over. Third takeaway I had was injuries. I thought, it's funny, when you said to Michael Jordan in the second year, injuries back then were treated so much differently than they are now. And I understand money's a large part of that, right? These players make so much money. They're so important to these organizations that you can't risk putting players in harm's way or putting them in a position to where they could get hurt and miss an extended part of the season. That's all that money that's going to be sitting there that you invest in these players that's not going to give you a return on your investment. So I understand money has really changed the outlook of how we deal with injuries and the carefulness that we have, especially nowadays with any sport when a player has an injury. But Michael Jordan's second year, right? He broke his ankle earlier on in the year, misses a ton of time, comes back in the minutes restriction. And it was similar to what we saw with Zion Williamson, right? You heard early on Michael was saying he was only allowed to play 14 minutes a game, 7 minutes each half. That was it. They had a stopwatch. If he went 1 second over, you heard that Phil Jackson was getting fired, and everyone, or not Phil Jackson, I apologize. I forget who the head coach was, but you know, he was losing his job if Michael played 14 minutes and 1 second. So they were careful in the beginning, right? And slowly they kind of let him back in, but all of a sudden now they get to the playoffs, going against one of the best teams ever in the 86 Celtics team. Let him loose. Absolutely let Michael Jordan loose, despite the fact that the Bulls were 30-52. Despite that, really had no chance of winning. They let Michael Jordan loose. They allowed him to come back and make a playoff push. And again, despite him being the face of the franchise, him already, even at that point in year 2, realizing he was special, he could be really the difference maker for this Bulls team. I'm shocked they allowed him to kind of basically keep on playing, despite, again, being 30-52. Despite the playoffs were there and they made the playoffs, 30-52, you had no shot at even advancing, let alone winning a game against the Celtics. I'm surprised that they allowed Michael to come back, to be honest, and basically risk. You heard that there's a 10% risk that he could never play again if he hurt his foot. Well, obviously we know he kept playing and that was no worry. But you look at again, Zion Williamson, how he missed a large chunk of the season and when he came back, it was a strict minutes restriction. Again, a lot of it's tied up to money. You don't want your face of your franchise getting hurt, especially in some meaningless games. But even we saw with Steven Strasburg in a baseball reference back in 2012, he was lighting the world on fire, coming off injury. The Nationals made the playoffs. He pitched the regular season. They made the playoffs, and they shut him down in the playoffs because they were so worried about him getting hurt and wanting him for the long haul. So injuries are so much looked at upon differently and taken carefully now compared to back then. That was definitely a big standout for sure. The fourth, I was kind of surprised by this. Maybe this is one of the most shocking takeaways for me. Tanking was still prevalent even in the 80s. That 86 team we talked about where MJ got hurt and came back late in the season and they had a chance and did make the playoffs despite winning 30 games that year. The Bulls, and Michael Jordan made this known, it seemed like they didn't want to make the playoffs. They didn't want to win. They knew if they made the playoffs, they'd be out of the lottery and would hurt them to getting a high draft pick. So even back then, even in the 80s, draft picks were still very important, and the mindset was still, if we're not going to make the playoffs or have a chance, we might as well lose every game possible to get the best valuable draft pick. So tanking was very prevalent even in the 80s, which I was honestly a little surprised by. I thought that this was more of a new school idea, to be honest. As analytics kind of come into the fold, as budgeting comes into the fold, where now you realize you can have a draft pick on a cheap contract. If you get a great draft pick, you have him, basically cheap labor for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the sports league that drafts you. And that's obviously a better asset than having maybe a player in his prime where you're paying a boatload of money to. So it's funny, even back then, tanking was still prevalent. Draft picks were still coveted greatly. And again, you could tell that in that second season, the Bulls did not want to make the playoffs, and Michael Jordan did not let that happen. It's funny, too, the fifth takeaway I had, because now I feel like there's so many old school-minded players, fans, and talk about how the NBA is soft these days. Everyone is too buddy-buddy. There's too much joking going on. There's not much hatred on the court, right? And we see that. A lot of these players now grow up playing together. They play in AAU circuits. They play each other in tournaments. They have Team USA. They have the Olympics. There's so many different ways that players from different teams come together and play in the same team, which leads them to being friends. You have a lot of superstars that are friends. Well, back then, you had during that '86 playoffs with Jordan and going against the Celtics, you had Jordan playing golf in the playoffs on an off day with Danny Ainge. Fast forward to the 1993 finals against the Suns, you had Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley playing 48 holes on an off day during the finals. Could you imagine this day and age if LeBron James or Steph Curry or Kawhi Leonard were playing golf on an off day with the team they were going against in the finals? Imagine Giannis and LeBron. We have a Bucks-Lakers finals, and you have them on the golf course, in between games 2 and 3 in LA. People would freak out. People would lose their mind. So even back then, players are still friendly, and maybe you can paint it as Jordan wanted to kind of get an edge and kind of give some of those players a false sense of friendship or false sense of security, and then he kind of use that, lulls them to sleep, and then gets them on the court. But still, he's playing golf with the enemy during the playoffs. I found that very interesting. And finally, speaking of that playoff series against the Celtics, he scored at will. So the box score for those 2 games, the first 2 games of the series, when they lost, they were swept, and then back then it was a 5-game series. They lost 3-0. But the box score he had is more impressive because of how we look at basketball now. And this is what I mean by that. So in 86, right, Jordan scored 49 points in Game 1, 63 in Game 2. Game 1, he shot 50% from the floor. He's 18 of 36. He was 0 of 0, 0 for 0 from 3. So think about that. He scored 49 points against one of the best teams of all time, the 86 Celtics team. Right? Hall of Famers all over the board. Great defenders all over the board. He scored 49 points without taking a 3. He followed that up in Game 2, going 22 of 41 for 63 points, 0 of 0 from 3. So there was no threat of a three-point shot. Defenders didn't have to worry about all these different angles and shots that Jordan was taking. He would go to the elbow, take a shot, take a wing jumper, get to the hoop. There was really only a few areas he would shoot from. And he was so good. He scored at will that it didn't matter that the defense knew what he was doing. Right? They could basically collapse and play from the foul line in. And he was still scoring at will. He was the only one who was scoring. So not only, again, is he not shooting from 3 and really shrinking the court for himself for the different areas that he is able to score, he's the only one. He's the only threat. Scottie Pippen was on the team back then. He is the guy. And he scored 49 and 63 points in those 2 games. And again, without even attempting one shot from 3. So that's just incredible right there in his second year in the league. Without, and again, the 3-point shot was not really even a big thing back then. But again, to just limit your court spacing, limit the areas and really the worries that defenders have to have, he still was able to score at will. Despite knew the defense knew what he was doing. Absolutely incredible. So I'll have to get your thoughts on you. Those are my 6 takeaways. What were your biggest takeaways on Last Dance? Premiere last night. Again, episodes 1 and 2 were on ESPN. I'll have to get your thoughts because there's just so much there. And we really kind of didn't even scratch the surface yet. Right? We covered basically, for the most part, his years at North Carolina and his early on rookie year, second year with the Bull, and had a little bit on Scottie Pippen and his anger with the front office about his contract. So there's still not much we got into in terms of the finals yet, winning the first finals, winning the second finals, and there's still so much to happen with his dad's unfortunate murder and him leaving the game after 93 to go to play baseball for 18 months. There's so much there that's going to be unpacked that we hope that we get answers to. But I thought, again, even just these first 2 episodes were absolutely incredible. So don't forget your takeaway too on Facebook, Worldwide Sports Radio Network, on Facebook or on Twitter, WWSRN_radio. Give your thoughts there. If you want to shoot me a text, we can read those on air as well. What were your big takeaways from the Last Dance premiere, episodes 1 and 2? We'll get into that. I'm going to come back. There was some interesting, kind of parallels. I thought there was one in particular. Obviously, the debate is LeBron or MJ. Who's the better player? I think there's an interesting parallel we can draw between Michael Jordan and Steph Curry. We'll get into that when we come back. It is the Morning Boys with your host, Ryan Hickey, right here on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
You're listening to the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It's time to wake up with the Morning Boys on Worldwide Sports Radio Network. And here's your host, Ryan Hickey.
That's right, it is the Morning Boys with your host, Ryan Hickey. We do appreciate you tuning in. We are reacting and giving our biggest takeaways from The Last Dance, the much-anticipated, highly hyped 10-part documentary on Michael Jordan's Bulls of the 90s. I'd love to get your thoughts and your takeaways. What did you find most interesting? Was there any shocks so far? Again, a lot of it was his early life, North Carolina, his rookie year at the Bulls, talking about walking in on his teammates, doing a lot of drugs, having a lot of women in their hotel rooms, having a cocaine traveling circus, which is what the Bulls were called before MJ got there. So interesting to hear him talk about that. And again, his just willingness to not lose. You have him in his second year coming back after an injury, despite the Bulls being just awful, finishing the year 30-52, making the playoffs somehow at 30-52, but still coming back, still wanting to win, and then goes out and drops 49 points and 63 points in the first 2 playoff games against the Celtics in the series. They would get swept on, but still impressive. So there's, at least I gave 6 takeaways, 1 for each of the 6 titles the Bulls won. It's incredible what they were able to accomplish. And more importantly, I think their 6th and final one might be the most impressive. For all of the distractions that went on, with all of the turmoil between the front office and the coaching staff, the front office and the players, the fact they're able to concentrate, block all that out, and actually play hard and play well is very, very, very impressive. So any takeaways you have, any thoughts you have from watching part 1 and part 2 of The Last Dance last night, drop a comment on Facebook, Worldwide Sports Radio Network. If you're on Twitter, WWSRN_radio, or my personal handle if you want to tweet me there, Ryan_Hickey, and the number 3. So read those on the air as well and get your takeaways. But another thing coming out of this documentary, I thought, is that there's an interesting parallel that could be drawn between when Michael Jordan came into the league and modern day when Steph Curry came into the league, right? The debate and the comparison we always hear, that's, of course, we're even hearing today in some talk shows. I've seen on Twitter already, the debate is raging on. Who is still the GOAT, Michael Jordan or LeBron James? Classic. We will not do this on the show because that debate ends just like every political debate ends. People get mad at each other. There's no winner. There's no real answer. And all it does is end screaming. So we're not going to do that. But that is, the common reference point. That is the common debate. Who's the better player, LeBron James or Michael Jordan? And I'm not saying Steph Curry belongs in this conversation. But it's interesting that Steph Curry is very similar to what Michael Jordan was doing in a way that really, LeBron James can never do. And that is change the way the game is actually played. Jordan bent the game to his will, and the league adjusted to him. Steph Curry, when he came into the league, bent the game to his will, and the league now adjusted to his style of play. And again, in a way that LeBron James never really was able to do. And here's what I mean by that. So Michael Jordan, he enters the league. And it's funny because early on in the documentary, you hear basically all of these current NBA stars basically saying, Michael's great, this hype is cool, but he's not going to carry a team. He's not a big man. This is a big man's game. He's a nice player, but he's 6'6". He's not going to carry the team. He's not going to be he's not going to be the guy to turn the Bulls around. He had Walt Frazier talking in an interview saying, quote, Michael's got to realize he's not 7 foot, so he's not going to carry a team in the NBA. You had Mark Eaton saying, quote, one man can't turn a team around. You even had the Bulls' own general manager, the guy who drafted Michael Jordan, and Rod Thorne come out and say, quote, we wish he was 7'1", but he isn't, end quote. So you had all this stuff, all this concern that, he's only 6'6", with a player that's short, he can be a nice player, but he's not going to be the face of the franchise. He's not going to turn the Bulls around. He's not going to make them a winner. And obviously Michael Jordan not only proved them wrong very quickly. And he changed the game because, again, this thinking was you have to have a big man as the center of your team, as the face of your franchise, basically as the pillar, right? You had Wilt Chamberlain. You had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You had the first 2 picks before Jordan in Hakeem Olajuwon and Sam Bowie, both over 7 feet. The big man was the play back in the 80s and the early 90s. Not really should say the 80s, and even before that, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was about size. It was getting it down low. Because if you had a bigger man, it's hard to defend. And obviously, layups and paint play, post play was so important compared to what it is now. So MJ comes into the league and basically again, flips that narrative on his head to where now he shows he can be the face of the franchise. He can be a pillar. He can lead a team, and he can lead a team that wins championships. So now teams start to draft and start to realize, okay, you don't have to be 7 foot for us to have a chance to win a title. You don't have to be 7 foot for us to have a franchise guy to be the leader going forward and be the guy to have us win a championship. No. Michael Jordan changed all of that and changed that thinking. So by the time we get into the 90s and 2000s, again, you're having people like Kobe Bryant, you're having guys like LeBron James lead franchises that aren't 7 feet tall, that aren't monsters down low in the paint, that can hit jump shots, that can get to the rim, that can drive hard to the lane. They can do all of that. And that was due in part because Michael Jordan changed the way the game is played and changed the way general managers and teams built their teams. Because now all of a sudden it was not about the big man. And as we see, the floor gets more spaced and more spaced and more spaced. Enter Steph Curry, drafted in 2009, just like Michael Jordan when he was drafted. Not much hype. There was some excitement. They were thinking, this could be a good player. Right? Steph Curry goes number 9, MJ goes number 3. And you heard early on in the documentary, Rod Thorne would have taken Hakeem if the Bulls had the number 1 pick. There was some excitement about Michael Jordan, but they had zero idea he would be anything close to the player he became. I think similar to Steph Curry, right? He's drafted in 2009. We know about his NCAA tournament run at Davidson. He has some hype, but he's a small player. He's, a perimeter player. Can he really be the face of the franchise? Can he really lead a team? There was some doubts. And even back then, back in 2009, the game was different. Today's day and age, it's about spacing, three-point shooting, right? You have teams like the Rockets who say that to the extreme where only take three-pointers and layups. But analytics have come into the game partly because of Steph Curry's play, and they realize the three-point shot is more efficient than a 2-point mid-range jumper. And to highlight that, back in 2011, 2012, right, you had Ryan Anderson, led the NBA. He had 166 threes that year in 11 and 12. So just, again, just as Steph Curry's really starting to become his own, he's had a few years in the league, he's starting to become his own. 4 years later, so just 4 years later, back in 2015, 2016, Steph Curry shatters that three-point record for a season. He hits 402 in a season that the Warriors win 73 games. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because in that year, 2015, 2016, just 4 years after Ryan Anderson led the league with 166 threes, Steph Curry changed the game because you had 17 players just 4 years later in 2015, 2016 who had more than 166 threes. 17 players with more than the leader of threes in a season 4 years prior. So just in that 4-year time span, you had the game completely change, and the Warriors really revolutionized, led and spearheaded by Steph Curry, of the perimeter game, shooting threes, shooting volume threes. So now, again, where you see this game, it's all about three-point shooting and layups. Get to the hole, get to the rim, or take a three. You had 27 players just this past season in 2018, 2019 that had more than 166 threes. So really, in the span of a few years, right, you had the game still being bullied, down low in the paint. You still have to have a big man presence. Still getting to the hole, still having mid-range jumpers was very important. Kobe Bryant really was the face of that as well. He had so many turnaround, mid-range elbow jumpers. And now just a few years, Steph Curry comes in. The game has completely changed to where now you almost get laughed at and mocked at if you're going to shoot a mid-range elbow jumper. It's viewed as inefficient. It's viewed as not necessary. Just in those few years, the game has completely flipped on its head and changed, spearheaded and led by Steph Curry. And now, like I said, you have centers going out and shooting threes. You have Anthony Davis, who's over 7 feet, shooting threes. The game has changed. And now, really, centers are more valuable if they can shoot threes. And they're looked at, differently if they are just post players and can't get out and space the floor. So Jordan was able to change the game when he came into the league, showing the NBA it's really not necessary to have, a big man, or you can win, I should say, without having a big man as your main focus, as your franchise guy, as your go-to number one option. Jordan changed the game that way, showing a 6'6" guard was able to lead a team to championships, which is a thinking that was not possible and not thought highly of back then in the 80s. Enter Steph Curry, again, in the 2009 he's drafted, and a few years later, the NBA changes their game to Steph Curry, and now all we see is threes. All over the place, it's raining down threes. So they changed the game. Jordan and Curry both changed the game. LeBron, again, one of the best ever play. But he was able, with his size, with his speed, with his strength, with his athleticism, to take advantage of the way the game is played, and he's able to mold his game, right? He started off going to the hole hard. His jump shot was shaky. He really couldn't shoot threes. He was not a great shooter when he first came into the league with the Cavaliers. He improved that markedly to where he is a knockdown three shooter. He could take a jump shot, and you are confident going in. But he's able to mold his game to how the game was evolving around him. Both Jordan and Curry changed the way the game is played, and the game itself changed to their styles, let alone the other way around. So I'm curious, would you agree with this comparison? Would you put Steph Curry in the same category as Michael Jordan? Not in terms of greatness of play. I'm not trying to say Steph Curry is one of the best of all time, or put Steph Curry in this LeBron MJ debate. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say and put a parallel to Michael Jordan changed the game when he came into the league. I'm putting Steph Curry in that same category as from when Steph came into the league, the game changed. The game absolutely changed, and teams and organizations cater to their strengths rather than vice versa. So let's get your thoughts. Would you put Steph Curry in the same category as Michael Jordan in terms of changing the game? Also take your Last Dance takeaways, whatever you watch. If you watched The Last Dance last night, I'd love to get your thoughts on Facebook, Worldwide Sports Radio Network, or on Twitter, WWSRN_radio, or my personal Twitter handle, Ryan_Hickey and the number 3. When we come back, we'll kind of get your comments, discuss quickly a change in college basketball that possibly could be beneficial for both prospects entering the NBA and also college basketball. And remember, we do have Brett McMurphy coming up at the top of the hour to talk a lot of college football and scheduling as you are listening to The Morning Boys with your host, Ryan Hickey, right here on the Worldwide Sports, as I get that ready, Radio Network.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It's time to wake up with the Morning Boys on Worldwide Sports Radio Network. And here's your host, Ryan Hickey.
And welcome back into the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It is the Morning Boys on this Monday morning. We do appreciate you giving us a few minutes here. Hopefully you enjoyed your weekend. It was a great, sane, safe weekend. You got to do something different. Maybe I know all these days are blending together, but hopefully you're making the most of it as we are powering through this pandemic. And again, hopefully the end is near. Hopefully sooner rather than later we will see. But at least we're glad, and hopefully at least for these next 2 hours, or really an hour, 10 minutes, we can provide you some sort of distraction, some sort of comedic relief maybe, and at least, again, kind of break up the monotony of everyday blending together. So again, we do appreciate you giving us a few minutes here every Monday and Thursday, as you do right here on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. So we'll get to Brett McMurphy here in just about 8 minutes at the top of the hour. He of Stadium was the person who, and the reporter, I should say, who sent out the anonymous survey to 112 athletic directors that we discussed a few weeks ago, whether it was how college football could return, right? If it's not played like we're normally used to seeing it from August to December, which every day that passes and nothing, changes in terms of social distancing laws, gathering laws, and states kind of opening up again. Every day that passes, and we get one day closer to August when the season starts, or really even July when practice starts, that is one day that, the season might be pushed back. So Brett was the one that kind of disseminated this information and then put it together to where he put up 3 or 4 different possibilities of how the season could resume and what it could look like. And also he was the one who broke the story that 88% of athletic directors from the Division I level are in favor of college football playoff expansion. We'll still discuss what it could look like. 8 teams, 16, 6 teams, 12 teams, 16 teams. Brett was making the case that 16 teams, again, a lot of momentum. So we'll discuss with him his thoughts, what a college football playoff expansion could look like, and more importantly, when. We're halfway through a 12-year deal. Could we see it before, this deal is up in 6 years? Or are we going to have to wait, we're going to have 6 more years of debating who, eye test versus resume versus this team beat this team, but this team beat this team. There's a 2-loss SEC team get in. Should we just put all 4 SEC teams in at one time, screw everyone else? So we'll discuss that because I think it's very interesting. And again, if you're a college football fan, the worst part about the college football playoff is that it's all speculation, and it's basically all preference. And what you think, makes the best team doesn't mean that someone else thinks that the best team is this. And it's just a lot of speculation off the field, more on the field. So we're going to discuss that with Brett in just a few minutes here. And also, I want to kind of debut a new game here on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It's going to be short-lived, unfortunately, because we don't have that much time. But the NFL Draft is, again, on Thursday, so we will have our draft needs right after Brett McMurphy. We have NFC North, the rest of those teams, and as well as the Falcons and the Saints to start the NFC South. But also, now it's kind of really the draft season, right? We have the draft coming up on Thursday, but especially with it being virtual, a lot of teams, I think, are going to try to get a head start at working to either trade up or trade down. We heard a bunch of teams looking to trade down. We heard a few teams looking to trade up. So we're going to try to, at least now with the rumor season full in effect, with a lot of these reports getting leaked out, whether they're purposely getting leaked out by teams wanting to kind of create a buzz, create a stir that, wow, maybe we really should trade up, or, we should really be aggressive and up our offer because maybe some teams are looking to trade up with this team. But there's plenty of teams like the Lions, the Giants, the Browns, rumored to be trading back. Now, the latest breaking news, the 49ers maybe are trading both of their picks. They have 2 first-round picks, number 13, which they got from the Colts, and number 31. Are they looking to trade back? So we're just kind of discussing even, Leonard Fournette in the trade block. Are these rumors realistic? Could these teams, what they're floating out there, is it realistic for it to happen? Could they actually trade back? Could the Lions go from number 3 to whatever, number 5, number 8, number 10? Would a team trade up to number 3 to draft presumably Tua or Justin Herbert? Would the team draft to number 4? So we'll kind of flush this out, realistic or reach. And also an interesting comment about Dave Gettleman from another general manager, basically saying that Dave Gettleman is playing all of us in the media. He's a lot smarter than we think. Rumor or reach, we'll get into that in just a little bit as well on the second hour. But when we come back, Brett McMurphy, again, of Stadium, was the one who sent out this anonymous survey to 112 athletic directors, was able to get a ton of feedback about what a possible college football season could look like. Could we have a college football national championship on Memorial Day weekend in 2021? Could we have, no more non-conference games and start the season in October? Could we have a season to where we have a break in between, a winter break where we start in October, winter break, resume in January and February? There's so many different options. So I think the one consensus, and we'll get Brett's take on this, I think he would agree, is that athletic directors, more than anything else, all agree that college football has to be played in one way or another. There's really no option and no athletic director right now agreeing that, we're not going to play. It's probably in our best interest not to play. The revenue is too great. The revenue is too important to fund other sports and fund the athletic department, that if that football revenue doesn't come in and doesn't come in close to what they're used to getting, which means fans in the stands, which means, 100,000 seat stadiums being packed week after week. If that doesn't happen, college sports could be in for a gloom and doom 2020, 2021, and moving forward. So we'll discuss that with Brett, and also college football playoff expansion. I think almost every college football fan, for the most part, is in agreement that the college football playoff needs to expand. What does that look like? 14. We have 4 teams. 6 teams, 8 teams, 12 teams, 16 teams. We'll get Brett's thoughts about what expansion could look like and when we could expect expansion and all that when we come back with Brett McMurphy right here on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It's time to wake up with the Morning Boys on Worldwide Sports Radio Network. And here's your host, Ryan Hickey.
And welcome back in to the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. It is the Morning Boys here with your host, Ryan Hickey. Now we do welcome in Brett McMurphy, Stadium College Football Insider. Very excited for this because Brett was the man before The Last Dance came out last night on ESPN, was the man who gave us a ton of content to talk about these last few weeks, whether it was college football playoff expansion, and more importantly, different options if college football does not start on time, how we could see college football at some point in the academic year. So, Brett, we do welcome you on here. Thanks so much for giving us a few minutes. How are you this morning?
Good to catch up with you.
Same, likewise as well. So, Brett, I think it's, obviously no one knows the real answer, right? Whether will sports return, if they return, when they return. So at least I guess it's safe to assume at this point, can we pretty much assume that college football will not start on time in August? And if so, that's probably also the case that we will not have 100,000 seat stadiums with fans in it if college football was to start in August?
Yeah, I just think it's going to be hard to get going in August. As you mentioned, I reached out to all 130 athletic directors in the past few weeks and asked them their thoughts on if the season is delayed, what are some of the options? And it was, varied from starting in October, November to even starting as late as after the Christmas break. So it does seem unlikely. We're still a little more than 4 months away from the start of the college football season. It does seem unlikely we will start on time. There's 7 games set for August 29th, including Navy and Notre Dame and Ireland. And I don't think anybody actually believes that Navy and Notre Dame will be able to play in Ireland. But it's still scheduled. It looks unlikely, but we'll see. I mean, everybody's, like everybody listening, and you and I, we're all waiting for the all clear when things can go back to normal or as close to as normal as before. And until we get that notification, whether it's medical official, government officials, society in general, whatever that is, all these athletic directors have all these plans in place, but they just don't know when they can implement them until they get that green light.
So speaking of, let's hit on some of those plans, like you said, because you kind of outlined 4 different ideas that athletic directors kind of gave to you that said, if college football doesn't start on time, here are some ideas about how we can fit in the season and still try to make as much revenue as possible despite it not starting on time. And that was like you said, you maybe span over 2 semesters, start it in October, November, have a winter break, and then resume in January, February. You can move the entire season, have some spring football where you hinted at and said we can have a college football playoff national title Memorial Day weekend, which would just be, from a viewing perspective, absolutely crazy. We have one option I think we can already rule out, which is, classes are online in the fall, but players are still allowed to come back. I think the vice president, when you had some of those conference commissioners talk with vice president, that was kind of the one outline and one idea they said that probably won't happen. And another idea you had was cut out the September schedule, basically cut out the non-conference and have our 8 or 9 game conference schedule start in October. So out of those three, with 2 of those ideas spanning into the spring semester, what is the most realistic if we were going to have football or as close to college football as we know it sometime during this academic calendar?
Well, I mean, really, it's impossible to say because it's all dependent on when we get the all clear. If we get the all clear in September and you can get things going, then they have a decision. They can take all 3 of those options. Obviously, they would prefer to play a 12-game season for revenue purposes as opposed to a conference-only season. But there is some concern among the athletic directors that they don't want to, if possible, they don't want to play at the same time as March Madness for basketball. Certainly, if you start in the spring, you're not going to be able to avoid that. But if you can start in October, November, then you could get the season wrapped up in March before the NCAA basketball tournament, because obviously that's a big deal money-wise or financially for the NCAA and more importantly for the member institutions. So it's not really that anyone says, hey, this is the best option. It's just like, again, when can we put these plans in place, and then we'll figure out which way to go. So, if we don't get the all clear until, November, December, then we probably have to wait until after the Christmas break. My opinion on what I think happens, there's no way we're going to start on August 29th. That's just my opinion only. I think it's very unrealistic that these university presidents are going to allow all these students to come back on campus, all these students from all over the world to come back on campus in the fall. And so because of that, I think a lot of major universities are just going to do online classes only. So if you can't have the students on campus, as you mentioned, you can't have the student athletes. And so then there would be no football in the fall. So that would either mean the academic year would get moved back, and instead of starting in late August, they would maybe move it to October or November. That's certainly an unknown. And then so that way the season could start then. Or if they basically say, well, no, we're doing online courses for the entire fall semester, then the next best option would be to start, late January, early February. And, yeah, that would make for a lot of issues. As you mentioned, Memorial Day could be when the season ends. The next season would be starting just a couple months after that. It would conflict with the NFL draft. You'd probably have a lot of high caliber projected NFL draft picks such as Trevor Lawrence of Clemson and others that probably would sit out the season if it doesn't start until February. But you know what? It's better than the alternative of no football, and make no mistake, the athletic directors know how critical that is. And again, as long as the health and safety of the student athletes will not be compromised, they are going to find out the best way to try to get some part of the season in, again, depending on when we get the all clear.
We're talking with Stadium College Football Insider Brett McMurphy. Follow Brett on Twitter at Brett_McMurphy. Ton of great nuggets and info there from the college football world. Brett, so I guess it's safe to say that the ones who are going to control college football in terms of return are going to be the university presidents and governors, right? Is that basically to say, we heard a lot of coaches, athletic directors speak out, but it's safe to say it's going to be up to the university presidents, like you said, to have students on campus or not, and these governors to allow kind of the all clear to happen. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think the governors, the health officials, the government officials, they're going to determine when, we can start gathering together in groups. So when everyone's not limited in the stay-at-home quarantines and those sort of things. So once those things are lifted, then the next thing would be the university presidents. And then they have to make a decision on if they're going to have classes on campus. certainly they will be getting input from their athletic directors, and also the Power 5 conference commissioners will have some input as well. But certainly a coach is not going to determine when the season is going to start. An athletic director is not going to determine when the season is going to start. But the athletic directors are in constant contact with the president, and so it's kind of going to go down, kind of roll down the hill that way. A lot of people ask me, what's the drop dead date we need to look forward to know if we're going to have college football or not. There's not really a date that I would say, okay, if we don't have something resolved by this date, then we're not having it. But I think what you need to look for, if people have an interest in that, is I think when we get towards the end of May, the 1st of June, I would expect some of these universities to start making decisions on whether they're having classes on campus or not. And I think those schools will make their individual decisions. And once that information comes out, I think you'll kind of get an idea if we're going to have college football in the fall or not. Because certainly if a lot of schools are coming out saying we're not having classes on campus, then you're not going to have a conference come out and say, well, you know what, we're still going to play football because they can't. So I think we'll hear from the individual schools before we get kind of a blanket announcement from the Power 5 commissioners, who will be the ones that announce together, kind of what the plan is. So we're probably another 30 to maybe 60 days away from that definitive answer.
And like you said, we already see schools, even big-time schools like Ohio State, already put all their summer classes online. So like you said, it's going to be, it's starting to get closer and closer for these schools to make a decision about fall classes being online or not. And obviously, like you said, if they're online, probably won't see college football at all during the fall. We are talking with Brett McMurphy from Stadium. So, Brett, you kind of hit on it, too. Like you just said, coaches and athletic directors aren't going to be the ones that get football back. I found it interesting over the last few weeks that college football coaches, more than any other, coach in any other sport, are the ones that are speaking out and the most defiant about return, right? You had obviously Mike Gundy, his epic, if you want to call it, rant about getting these players back on campus and getting money through the state of Oklahoma again. You had Dabo Swinney definitively saying that, come in August, their Clemson's going to be packed with fans. They're going to have their season as normal. I don't know if there's really an answer to it, but is there maybe a reason why you think these coaches, more than, NBA coaches, MLB coaches, NHL coaches, those coaches whose seasons were actually stopped midway through, why college football coaches are so speaking out defiantly and basically trying to speak and will into words that college football was played on time and is unaffected compared to any other sport, or any other coaches should say, in any other sport?
Yeah, you kind of said it, kind of trying to will in words. That's kind of their DNA. That's their makeup. It's like they're in the locker room making this passion speech to go win one for the Gipper or whatever. They obviously do not have any different information or more information than their athletic directors, than their university presidents, than health officials, etc. But so I think part of it is they want to only be positive about it, and they want to be as optimistic as possible, and maybe they went a little bit over the edge, but that's just kind of their personalities. Look, I like both of those coaches. They're both very successful. But yeah, they don't have – look, I gave you my opinion on what I think is going to happen. I don't know. I'm basically reading the tea leaves. They don't know more than I do either. I think they're just trying to be optimistic and showed their optimism to full tilt, obviously.
And at least last question in terms of, college football being played, the possibility, if not, if so. We already saw Cincinnati, kind of the first shoe drop with what could happen if we don't see college football played at some point during the academic calendar. They cut soccer. You had the Group of Five conference write a letter to Mark Emmert asking for relief for, some of the for how they could stay D1. So basically not, having them or force them to cut sports. How much or how big a trouble are some of these non-revenue sports at some of these big-time schools if college football, if the worst possible case happens where we don't have college football at all during the 2020-2021 academic calendar? Could we see a ton of non-revenue sports get cut, or do you think if this is just maybe a one-year thing, schools can still survive and sports could still survive if college football and that revenue is not played?
Well, from the athletic directors I talked to, they said cutting sports is a last resort option. But certainly when you're looking at trying to recoup some of this revenue, even if we still do have a season, even if it is delayed, the revenue's not going to be what it's been in past years because of, probably lower attendance, and you're playing, at weird times of the year, so different factors would come into play. But yeah, it's going to impact all schools from the Power 5 level to the Group of 5 level. In your scenario, if there's no football at all, one AD summed it up best to me. Said, if we don't have a football season, we're bleeped. And
it's a good point.
That means Group of 5 schools could drop football. That means Group of 5, Power 5 schools would probably eliminate Olympic sports overnight. Would it be for temporary or would it be permanent? It'd probably be permanent, but you don't know that stuff. Certainly, Iowa State, Washington State, Wake Forest, among some of the schools, Oregon, that have announced that either coaching or athletic staff have taken pay cuts, and these are Power 5 schools. And this just has to do with the loss of revenue from the NCAA basketball tournament. This has nothing to do with we still don't know is going to happen. So yeah, it could get pretty grim. And certainly I think one thing is, because of this, I think, since conference expansion in the past dozen or so years, we've seen the kind of gap between the power schools and the non-power schools grow bigger and bigger. Certainly the media rights deals where the Power 5 schools are getting up to $50 million per school, where the smaller conference schools are getting maybe $3 or $4 million per school. I think this, COVID-19 and the financial impact of it, I think it's going to accelerate. It's certainly, that's why the athletic directors feel so upwards of $50 million in revenue if the season isn't.
Brett McMurphy. Brett, I figured maybe we can finish off here with just a positive, some anticipation, because also on top of the article directors, out of the 112, 88% of them are in favor of college football playoff expansion, even as high as 16 teams. In your mind, what is the best number for a college football playoff expansion that's not watering down the playoff?
No problem with 8. I actually would have no problem with 16, although, in college football, I don't really think there's 16, But yeah, it was pretty staggering. 88% of the ADs said they want an expanded playoff. That's the good news. Those 72% want an 18 playoff. I think ultimately that's what we'll end up with. We'll have automatic bids, so you're going to have to deal with that. But the Power 5 conference champs would be in. But the biggest disagreement, it would be the Group of 5 should get an automatic bid. But obviously, so I think it's pretty safe to say that the Group of 5 will have a representation for the Group of 5 team. It did that in place then. The first year, number 20 Boise State would have been in the playoff where the number 17 or number 20 team is in an 18 playoff. So I think it's pretty apparent we will get an expanded play.
That's the perfect expansion. It's not too many sort of prerequisite. I would agree with that. I'm just curious because that it would water it down and it would a bigger importance to get to a conference championship game. Better, some of these non-conference games, we see some teams, the risk is greater than reward. I think this all opens up college down or hurt the regular season product on the field.
Some of the ADs said, look, we may have to reduce the regular season from 12 games back to, they could go back to 11 regular season games. And yeah, you're right. There's already a number of the Power 5 programs that are, you can go on and on and on. And I think the athletic directors have scheduled these games with an 18-0 or 11-1 to have it as relevant or even more relevant. And then the other and by a slim 53 to 47% margin, they picked on campus. So if you've got the incentive and importance on the regular, and then also for the number 1 seed, probably nine times out of 10, that's 4 teams with home games. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it will add to the importance, and I think we'll see these lopsided non-conference games that have been scheduled, annually by literally every school across the country will get greatly reduced, and we'll see more.
For some of these big-time Goliath matchups, just having LSU Texas last year was just incredible because, again, it's something you rarely see. We're talking about Brett McMurphy until another 6 years after the contract ends, right? They signed a 12-year deal about the college football playoff. This deal could be ripped up 2, 3, 4 years from now, we can have a college football playoff expand.
Say, well, let's just tear it up. Let's rewrite it. Let's expand the playoff from 4 to 8. Well, yeah, you can tear up any contract, but to do that, you would then have to tear up contract. Thing is, at least right now, the university presidents don't want an 18 playoff. Now, in 6 years, I'm sure their thoughts will change. I think the only way 2021 academic year, and schools are decimated by the loss of revenue, and somebody suggests, hey, you know what? Then I think possibly we could see the expansion a lot sooner. But if we're able to get the season in this year, even if it is delayed till the spring, I don't think we're going to see the playoff take effect until after 2025. Because even though we can sit here and say, okay, we want these 8 teams in, and the game should be played here. The biggest question that nobody has answered and nobody knows the answer to is when you would play these first round games. Because right now the presidents don't want the conference championships, because that is the week of finals. The week after that's Christmas. They don't want the championship game to go beyond the second Monday in January. So with those limitations, to add another round of games, and then a lot of people have said, well, you can move the season up a week, but then that you screw those off those dates. And so that's why I think it's very, 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 some of the ADs want it. The university, they want it after teams should be in the playoffs. So they're pretty well set that they're going to fit in that extra round of playoffs.
That is interesting. I didn't really take into account, like you said, following Brett on Twitter at Brett_McMurphy. First of all, shame on you. Very generous. We appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk to you again about some. That is Brett McMurphy of Stadium. Again, just some great stuff. And I don't think that the season will start in August. It's actually a shame because I'm supposed to go to the Notre Dame Navy game in Island. Family's taking a nice that game in person. And unfortunately, I'm with Brett. I don't think it's going to happen if college football is played. But at least for the most part, like we've been saying, it seems like there is a consensus just too great. And, there could be catastrophic loss. I think it's safe to say it probably won't start on time. Start sooner rather than later. So discuss that. College football playoff expanded to 16 teams. We'll get into that when we come back. It is the Morning Boys with your host, Ryan Hickey, right here on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. Radio Network.